was hard for me being that young and being in the industry and not knowing where to turn, and everyone, telling me they love me and, just turn their back on you in a second.
Justin Bieber's silence is over, and what he's finally saying is shaking the foundations of Hollywood. After years of whispers, mysterious footage, and unanswered questions, Bieber just broke his silence on the man who once had full access to him behind closed doors, Sean "Diddy" Combs. But what makes this revelation so chilling isn't just what Justin said, it's what he didn't say. Because in the world of fame, silence often screams the loudest. And behind that silence lies a disturbing trail of manipulation, power games, and secrets that some of the most powerful names in the music industry never wanted exposed. This isn't just about one artist. It's about a system built to protect predators and silence victims. But what if we told you that Usher, yes, the same Usher who discovered Bieber, might have been part of the same cycle? What if Diddy didn't just influence Justin's career, but infiltrated his life in ways most people can't even imagine? The clues have been there for years, hidden in interviews, buried in footage, hinted at in Justin's own songs. Today, we're connecting the dots, because once you see the full picture, you'll never look at the music industry the same way again. Let's break it all down. For years, Justin Bieber remained quiet while rumors swirled around his early years in the industry. Years marked by fame, exhaustion, and a constant presence of much older men in positions of unchecked power. But now, everything has changed. In a carefully worded yet emotionally heavy statement, Bieber's representatives finally addressed his connection to Sean "Diddy" Combs amid the explosive federal case unraveling around the music mogul. While the statement insisted Bieber was not one of Diddy's direct victims, it also included something deeply unsettling: a complete absence of denial.
His rep telling ET, although Justin is not among Sean Combs' victims, there are individuals who were genuinely harmed by him. Shifting focus away from this reality detracts from the justice these victims rightfully deserve.
No mention of rumors being false, no defense of Diddy's character, no claim that the accusations were exaggerated. In fact, the statement seemed deliberately crafted to acknowledge a truth without fully confronting it, an eerie balancing act between speaking out and staying silent. What made the message even more jarring was the timing. It didn't come in the heat of a social media trend. It wasn't part of a PR campaign. It dropped right as damning testimony, videos, and witness accounts against Diddy were entering the public record. As if to say, I can't stay quiet anymore, even if I'm not ready to say everything out loud. But for those paying attention, Bieber's silence over the years was never really empty. It was strategic, calculated, and now that he's decided to speak, even just a little, every word matters. The statement came across less like a PR move and more like a message coded in restraint. I was there. I saw things. I know what really happened.
When is that coming, that Lamborghini? We talked about this last time.
He had the Lamborghini for a day or two, and he had access to the house, and he knows better than to be talking about the things that he does with Big Brother Puff on national television.
The industry might still be protecting itself, but Justin just cracked the door open. And now everyone's leaning in to hear what comes next. But even before the statement, the clues were already there, buried in footage, scattered in interviews, and hidden in moments most people missed. And one of the most disturbing came from a weekend that would change everything: Justin's now infamous 48 hours with Diddy. It started with what seemed like a casual media moment. Diddy, smiling wide, bragging on national television about spending 48 hours with a 14-year-old Justin Bieber. But to anyone watching closely, the tone felt off. Too relaxed, too proud, too familiar. He wasn't describing a mentorship. He was boasting about custody of a teenager like it was some kind of prize. We're going full buckful crazy. Diddy laughed while describing the upcoming 2-day hangout like it was the ultimate fantasy. Not for a mentor, not for a business partner, but for a kid. And that's when people started asking, why did Diddy, who had no official role in Justin's development, have this level of access to a child star who had just exploded into global fame? What made this encounter even more disturbing is how unbothered everyone seemed. No one stepped in, no one raised red flags, and no adult seemed to ask the most obvious question. What exactly were they doing during those 48 hours? There was no manager, no parent, no representative from the label publicly linked to the weekend. It was Diddy and Justin, alone, unchecked, and invisible to the public for nearly 2 full days. And yet, the industry treated it like just another quirky celebrity bonding moment. But looking back, it was anything but normal, because when you pair that footage with the testimonies coming out now, testimonies of isolation, grooming, and manipulation from other young artists, Diddy's behavior toward Bieber feels less like an industry rite of passage and more like the beginning of something predatory. The language he used during that interview wasn't playful. It was revealing. He didn't describe their time together in professional terms. He used fantasy language. He smiled while saying he'd been given custody of Justin. These weren't slips of the tongue, they were signals. And the more we rewatch that footage, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Not because of what's said, but because of what's implied. That something happened. That Justin saw something. That maybe, just maybe, he experienced something he still can't put into words. And while Diddy played it cool for the cameras, Justin's face told a different story. But if you think that 48-hour trip was random, it wasn't. In fact, the person who made it possible was someone who already knew Diddy's dark side, someone who had lived it, and instead of protecting Justin, he handed him over. That someone was Usher. For years, the story the public was sold was clean and inspiring. Usher, the R&B superstar, discovered a young, talented Justin Bieber on YouTube and gave him his big break. It was marketed like a fairy tale, an older artist passing the torch to the next generation. But the truth, as it's now beginning to unravel, is far more unsettling. Because Usher didn't just discover Justin. He handed him off, and not to a manager or label executive, but to Diddy. A man with a long, quiet trail of disturbing rumors, secret gatherings, and a reputation for crossing lines that insiders never dared to talk about publicly. And what makes this even more twisted is that Usher knew exactly who Diddy was, because he had been through it himself. Decades ago, when Usher was just 13 years old, Diddy took him to what was infamously known as Flavor Camp, a supposed mentorship retreat, but one that insiders have since described as a grooming ground disguised as industry bonding. It wasn't a safe, structured artist boot camp. It was a blurred adult environment where boundaries didn't seem to exist. Usher has remained mostly silent about what happened during that time, but sources close to him say he came out of that experience with a deep understanding of Diddy's world and the cost of staying in it. So, when Usher brought Justin into the spotlight, he wasn't making a mistake. He was continuing a pattern. He was repeating a cycle, and that cycle didn't look like mentorship. It looked like complicity. Usher was one of the only people who could have stopped what was happening. Instead, he created the connection, introduced the access. And once that connection was made, he stepped back. He didn't stay by Justin's side, he didn't shield him, he let Diddy in. And from that point forward, Justin was caught in a dynamic he likely didn't understand until it was far too late. A dynamic where his success came attached to silence, where his fame was managed through manipulation, and where the very people who claimed to believe in him were offering him up to something darker than he ever imagined. But Usher and Diddy weren't the only ones in control. The real power behind this entire situation wasn't just a person, it was the industry itself. A well-oiled machine built to protect predators, silence victims, and keep the money flowing at all costs. Beneath the glossy surface of award shows, hit records, and smiling photo ops lies a machinery built on silence. The entertainment industry doesn't just reward talent, it shields power. And when that power is abused, the cover-ups come quickly and quietly. That's exactly how Diddy operated for years, not in isolation, but with the backing of an entire system. Now, during the trial, prosecutors have revealed a list of over 100 names, celebrities, executives, influencers, all potentially linked to the ongoing investigation.
They all know him, appeared with him, partied with him. Clinton, Obama, Trump, and they're not the only famous people who partied and hung out with Diddy. Apparently there's like at least, 100 plus who are going to be named in his trial. The candidates are being asked about their own connections to or impressions of an array of celebrities, and with no explanation why, at least not yet. The parlor games have begun, my friends. Everybody is trying to connect the dots between the shiny, famous names and the beleaguered rap star Diddy.
Not because they're all guilty of abuse, but because they were close enough to see it and said nothing. And some didn't just stay quiet. They allegedly helped keep everything buried. The public may be shocked to see names like Kanye West, Michael B. Jordan, and other high-profile figures included on that list. But insiders aren't, because in Hollywood, silence isn't neutral. It's transactional. It's a way of preserving your career, your access, your protection. And the more powerful the abuse, the tighter the circle of silence around them. In Diddy's case, there are even whispers of political strings being pulled. Some claim that celebrity allies have reached out to political figures, including Donald Trump, in hopes of securing a pardon. That's not loyalty. That's damage control. That's fear of what could be exposed if Diddy falls. And here's where it gets even darker. People didn't just stay silent. Some may have actively participated in the illusion. They helped create an image of Diddy as a harmless mogul, a party king, a mentor, a fun uncle to rising stars like Justin. All while red flags were ignored, all while warning signs went unacknowledged. And for every young artist like Justin, caught in the spotlight but manipulated in the shadows, there's an industry executive behind the scenes pulling strings and cashing checks. That's how predators stay in power for decades. Not because no one knows, but because everyone does. And they've all agreed not to say a word, but while Hollywood stayed quiet, Justin began to unravel. The pressure, the trauma, and the weight of what he endured didn't just disappear. It started showing up everywhere, from the way he acted to the things he posted. And soon, the mask began to slip. Fame has a way of making pain look glamorous. The lights, the applause, the designer clothes, all distractions from the fractures forming behind the scenes. For Justin Bieber, those cracks became impossible to hide. As his career skyrocketed, his behavior began to shift. The once smiling teen heartthrob was now spiraling in public. Erratic tweets, arrests, emotional interviews, bizarre live streams. At first, the media painted it as a typical child star meltdown. But now, with everything that's come to light, it's clear those weren't just outbursts. They were symptoms. The trauma he carried was surfacing in real time, and most people watching had no idea what was really going on. His fans did, though. They started noticing patterns. The way he would flinch or go cold in old footage when Diddy was nearby. The forced laughs, the uncomfortable energy, the interviews where he looked cornered. Then came the Yummy music video, seemingly a bubblegum track, but loaded with disturbing imagery, lavish feasts filled with grotesque food, emotionless children seated at the table, and Justin, in the middle of it all, staring dead into the camera like he was trapped in a twisted performance. Fans quickly began decoding it. Many believed the video wasn't just abstract art, it was a cry for help, a message buried in symbolism, a way for Justin to expose the abuse without ever naming names. And then there was the promo. Photos of babies, captions that didn't match the tone of the song. It felt like a warning dressed up as pop culture. And when asked about it, Justin gave vague answers, never denying the interpretations, never shutting down the theories. Because maybe he couldn't speak freely. Maybe he still can't. But those social media breakdowns, those weren't just attention-seeking moments. They were moments where the trauma leaked through, where the weight of what he had seen and experienced came crashing down. And behind every post, every shaky video, every awkward interview, was a kid still processing the price of survival. But Justin didn't just break. He fought back. And one of the biggest signs of that came when he made a bold decision to walk away from the very people who launched his career and reject everything they still stood for. It was the move no one saw coming. When Usher was tapped to headline the Super Bowl halftime show, fans immediately began speculating whether Justin Bieber would join him on stage. After all, it was Usher who helped launch his career, who once referred to Bieber as family. A reunion on the world's biggest stage felt like destiny. But when the invite came, Justin said no, not publicly, not with drama, quietly, firmly. He declined, and that single decision sent a louder message than any tweet or interview ever could. I'm done with you. Turning down the Super Bowl isn't a casual move for an artist. It's a once-in-a-lifetime performance, a global platform. But for Justin, it wasn't an opportunity, it was a trap. Sharing a stage with Usher would have reopened a chapter he had spent years trying to escape. Because by then, he wasn't just distancing himself from past collaborators. He was severing ties with the men who had been complicit in what he now understood to be a deeply toxic system. He'd unfollowed them, stopped attending their events, refused to endorse anything linked to their names. His message was clear: whatever loyalty existed before, it's over. In interviews, Justin began speaking with more honesty about the trauma of his early fame. He talked about the shame he still carried, the identity struggles, the self-destructive habits he picked up along the way. But there was a pattern to these interviews. He never mentioned Usher or Diddy by name, as if even years later, the contract of silence was still partially in place, still hanging over him. But his actions told the story. He wasn't just moving on, he was making a statement that the men who claimed to believe in him weren't mentors. They were part of what damaged him. And by walking away, Justin wasn't just reclaiming his voice, he was reclaiming control. And while Justin found the strength to step away, others were only beginning to find their voices. Women who had stayed silent for years started coming forward, revealing that the pattern Justin hinted at wasn't isolated. It was systemic, it was widespread, and the evidence? Brutal. As Justin was breaking away from the shadows that haunted his past, others were stepping into the spotlight to confront theirs head-on. Cassie Ventura, once seen as Diddy's long-term partner and muse, filed a lawsuit that exposed a decade of unimaginable torment. She detailed how Diddy allegedly isolated her, manipulated her, and subjected her to cycles of control and degradation. The public had always seen Cassie as poised and quiet, someone who had stepped away from music without much explanation. But now we know the silence wasn't peace, it was survival. Her lawsuit laid bare a hidden reality that had been festering for years. Behind the luxury and red carpets was a life of coercion, fear, and calculated psychological warfare. And Cassie wasn't alone. Former Danity Kane member Dawn Richard added her voice, and her story echoed the same pattern. While working under Diddy's label, she said she and other women were subjected to repeated harassment. She described Diddy barging into their changing rooms without warning and even groping them. But what struck most people wasn't just the stories of inappropriate behavior, it was how matter-of-factly she described them. As if this was the norm, as if this kind of treatment was baked into the system. Her most shocking account? The time she saw Diddy physically assault Cassie with a skillet full of eggs. It was brutal, sudden, and it confirmed what many suspected. The danger wasn't just emotional, it was physical. These weren't isolated events. They were part of a structure, a framework of fear and submission where power protected itself and the victims had nowhere to go. And now, with the trial in full swing, these women aren't just testifying for themselves. They're testifying for every young artist, male or female, who got caught in the web. Their courage isn't just powerful, it's dangerous. Because every name they drop, every detail they share, threatens to bring down the whole house of cards the industry built to protect men like Diddy. And as the stories multiply, the pattern becomes undeniable. This wasn't about personal relationships gone wrong. This was about systemic exploitation. But while Cassie and Dawn have stepped forward, one name continues to hang in the balance. The person many believe holds the final piece to this puzzle. The one who saw it all from the inside, but hasn't yet taken the stand. That name is Justin Bieber. There's a reason Justin Bieber hasn't taken the stand. A reason that goes deeper than contracts, NDAs, or timing. It's fear. Not just fear of reliving trauma, but fear of what comes after you speak. In an industry where careers are destroyed, with a single phone call where entire teams of lawyers and executives are hired to discredit and erase anyone who poses a threat, silence isn't just self-preservation, it's survival. And Justin has seen what happens to those who try to take on the system. He watched other victims come forward and get ignored. He saw how quickly people who once praised him would switch sides. And perhaps most importantly, he knows how much power is still protecting Diddy from behind the curtain. There are even more chilling developments surfacing. Key witnesses in this case have already started disappearing, literally. One male sex worker who reportedly handed over tapes to federal investigators is now missing. No contact, no updates, completely vanished. It's eerily similar to what happened during the Tory Laney's case, where the one witness whose DNA was on the weapon also vanished before trial. Coincidence or calculated silence? Either way, it sends a message to anyone watching. If you're planning to tell the truth, be ready to pay the price. Justin might also be facing pressure from all directions. management, former affiliates, even legal representatives who fear what his testimony could trigger. The system doesn't just discourage truth, it punishes it, especially when that truth exposes icons, money machines, and power brokers. And yet, every day he remains silent, speculation grows. Because the signs are there, the timelines match, the footage exists. And whether he ever testifies or not, Justin's silence, deliberate and haunted, is already speaking volumes. But the real storm is just beginning. The trial isn't winding down, it's heating up. And what comes next could unravel everything, because prosecutors aren't done, and neither are the victims. And the deeper we dig, the more names fall into the fire. What started as whispers has now erupted into a full-blown reckoning. Diddy's trial isn't just about one man's downfall, it's a spotlight shining directly on the machinery that allowed him to operate in the dark for so long. And now, that spotlight is sweeping across the entire entertainment industry. With each new testimony, with every resurfaced clip, and with every survivor who chooses to speak, the illusion begins to crack. The public is no longer content with vague denials and PR statements. They want answers. They want accountability. And most of all, they want the truth. Justin Bieber may never testify, but that doesn't mean he hasn't spoken. His actions, cutting ties, declining the Super Bowl, releasing coded messages in his music, are the breadcrumbs left behind by someone who wants to tell the truth, but still fears what that truth might cost. And he's not alone. There are others. Artists, assistants, dancers, stylists, people who were in the rooms no cameras could enter. People who heard the threats, saw the manipulation, and lived through the aftermath. The silence is beginning to crack because victims are realizing something powerful. Once one voice breaks through, it creates space for others. But let's be clear, this is far from over. Prosecutors are still unsealing documents. Journalists are still digging through evidence, and more names are being added to the list. If you thought the scandals we've seen so far were explosive, just wait. This story is only at the halfway point. And with the world finally paying attention, the industry can no longer pretend this is just tabloid noise. What's happening now is historic. And whether Justin steps into the courtroom or continues speaking through his art, one thing is certain. The truth has already started to surface. And once it's out, there's no going back. If this video opened your eyes to what's really going on behind the scenes, don't scroll past it. Amplify it. Hit that like button so more people see the truth. Subscribe if you're tired of sugar-coated headlines and want the raw, unfiltered stories Hollywood tries to bury. And drop a comment below. What do you think Justin is holding back? What's the real reason behind the silence? Share this with someone who still believes this is just a rumor. Because the more we talk, the louder we get. And the harder it becomes for them to keep the truth hidden. We're not done yet. See you in the next video, because more names are about to fall.